Your brain does not stop when your heart does. And what happens in the minutes after is one of the strangest discoveries in modern neuroscience. Here is exactly what science says happens when you die. The moment your heart stops beating, blood stops flowing. Within 5 seconds, your blood pressure drops to 0. Within 10 seconds, you lose consciousness as your brain is starved of oxygen. Your pupils dilate, your muscles go slack. To anyone watching, you look dead. But inside your skull, something remarkable is beginning. Your brain cells are not dying, not yet. They have their own reserve of energy, a small supply of ATP stored inside each neuron. That reserve keeps them alive, and for the next several minutes, your brain cells are still intact, still functional, still capable of being revived. For decades, doctors were taught that brain death begins after 5 to 10 minutes without oxygen. That turns out to be wrong. Research from NYU Langone Medical Center has shown that brain cells can survive for hours after death. In one landmark experiment, scientists restored activity to the brains of pigs 4 hours after death. The cells responded. They metabolized sugar. They fired electrical signals. 4 hours. The old 5-minute rule was never a biological limit, it was a medical one. After 5 minutes without CPR, the chances of revival drop sharply, but the cells themselves are still alive far longer than anyone realized. Now, here is where it gets strange. Within minutes of your heart stopping, something called terminal spreading depolarization begins. Scientists call it a brain tsunami. Here is what happens. Your neurons maintain an electrical charge by keeping certain ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, on specific sides of their membranes. This takes energy. When the energy runs out, the gates collapse. A massive wave of electrochemical energy sweeps across your cortex, releasing stored ions and neurotransmitters all at once. It is the largest simultaneous release of energy your brain will ever produce. This wave moves slowly, about 1 to 5 millimeters per second, spreading outward from the point of initial failure. And here is the critical detail. It is reversible. If oxygen is restored before the wave completes, the neurons can reset. If it is not, the damage becomes permanent. Scientists at the Charité Center for Stroke Research recorded this wave in dying human patients for the first time in 2018. They described it as the moment that marks the transition between life and death, not the heart stopping, not the breathing stopping. This wave.
But the brain tsunami is not the end. Something else follows. In a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Dr. Jimo Borjigin at the University of Michigan monitored 4 patients who died of cardiac arrest while connected to EEG machines. 2 of the 4 showed something no one expected. After their ventilators were removed and their hearts stopped, there was a sudden surge of gamma wave activity. Gamma waves are the fastest brain waves we can measure. They are associated with conscious thought, memory retrieval, deep concentration, and vivid dreaming. They occur in the posterior cortical hot zone, the area of the brain most closely linked to consciousness itself. The surge happened in the same brain region, at the same frequency, with the same coordinated pattern that appears when a healthy person is deeply remembering something or dreaming. It lasted only seconds, but it was there. Dr. Borjigin believes the brain, deprived of oxygen, triggers a cascade of neurotransmitter release. Serotonin floods the visual cortex, producing vivid imagery. Endorphins create a sense of peace. Noradrenaline encodes the experience into memory. The result, she argues, may explain what millions of cardiac arrest survivors have described as near-death experiences. The light, the life review, the feeling of peace, the sensation of seeing loved ones. These are not hallucinations. They are not random noise from a dying brain. They correlate with structured, coordinated, high-frequency electrical activity that resembles the most intense forms of conscious experience we know how to measure. Dr. Sam Parnia at NYU Langone has studied this phenomenon for over 20 years. In his landmark study, teams in 25 hospitals monitored patients during cardiac arrest. Even up to an hour into resuscitation, some patients showed spikes of brain activity consistent with lucid thought. When survivors were interviewed, they described watching doctors perform CPR from above. They recalled specific conversations. Some described events that were later verified as accurate. Parnia does not believe consciousness is simply produced by the brain. He believes the brain interacts with consciousness the way a radio receives a signal. Damage the radio, you lose the signal. But the signal itself may not originate there. This is controversial. Many neuroscientists disagree, but the data from his studies is harder to dismiss than the theory. What all of this points to is a single conclusion that is reshaping how medicine defines death. Death is not a moment. It is a process. Clinical death, the moment the heart stops, is not the end of brain activity. It is the beginning of a cascade. The brain tsunami, the gamma surge, the slow death of individual cells over hours or even days. Consciousness may persist through at least some of this process. We do not yet know when it ends. A study presented at the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences earlier this year found evidence of brain activity up to 102 minutes after clinical death in coma patients. 102 minutes. We once thought death was a light switch, off, instant, final. The science says it is more like a sunset, slow, gradual, and the exact moment the light disappears may be impossible to define. That's today's science, simplified. Follow for tomorrow's study.